Hi there, everyone, and welcome to a Novastar Prep webinar event. I'm happy to see everybody joining from the waiting room, and it looks like we're going to have some great attendance tonight, and I'm thankful that you're all here. I'm letting people come in, so get situated, get settled. As you can see on the screen here, we just have some information about Novastar Prep if you're new to us, and then we'll get into the presentation itself and why you all are here tonight. But again, people are still coming in, so I'll just go over a few things before we get started. Novastar Prep, as many of you may know, because we've worked with Oakton for a long time, offers comprehensive tutoring services, test prep expertise, college readiness, which is how I started here with the company, and dedicated support from success advisors. So our model's a little different than other tutoring companies, and we're really there for you and the entire family. And another thing we do is we're here for PTSAs, for families in different communities, working with booster clubs, and different organizations associated with students and schools to provide helpful free information like tonight's webinar. So with that being said, just a few things to keep in mind for everyone here tonight, as we're going to be covering a topic that is very important but has a lot of information in it. We're going to be talking about the road to college. So this is about navigating testing and admissions. So it's as much about this we can get into 1 hour, and everything that you're seeing tonight, you will get back in a recording from me, but feel free to screenshot as you go throughout. But you'll have a long-standing YouTube link for this instead of one that just expires from Zoom. So that's one piece of tonight's event in terms of housekeeping. You will receive the recording. The other piece is you may notice that the chat is disabled. I can send some things in there for you, and some links that may be helpful. For example, I'll pop some in right now. And this would be related to any of the links you might need from us tonight. And they'll also, of course, be sent to you via email. So let me pull these here from my other screen and pop those into the chat for you. This is helpful in terms of booking a consultation or checking out our mock tests and boot camps. But as I mentioned, the webinar chat is disabled, but the Q&A is wide open. So I have it popped up here on my second screen. So as we go throughout tonight's presentation, feel free to drop a question in there. You can also save it for the end for Q&A. And if you think of it, 2 hours after tonight's webinar, you can certainly email me, and I'll be in touch as well with the recording and whatnot. But other than that, those are really the details for tonight in terms of what to expect and how you're going to be able to access this information later. So let's dive in. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. We're happy to partner with Oakton High School yet again, and happy to share information related to what is one of the most important parts of a student's high school journey, preparing for college. So we're going to dive into quite a bit of information about that this evening. And just, a little bit about me, if you haven't been to one of my webinars before, I am the Education Programs Director here at Novastar Prep. I'm also a licensed high school guidance counselor. I'm licensed in Massachusetts, which is reciprocal in most states, and I have 10 years of experience being a high school counselor. That was half in a private school and then half in a public school for the second half of my career. I've been a college coach for a very long time and an ELA and writing coach. That's how I started here at the company in both of those capacities. And then I moved into the interior team where I get to do things like this and speak to families, share a lot of information that's helpful, keep track of the changing trends and admissions today, and generally be a resource for all of you. So I still get to do a lot of what I love, and then just in a little bit of a different setting. I was also a college level English instructor for a while there, teaching English comp and intro to literature and things of that nature. I did mention before about Novastar Prep. If you are local, you know that we've been here for a long time, 18 years of experience and built by educators. Everyone who works with us has a background in education and is coming from a place of lifelong learning and really loving to help families and students. So what you're really here for tonight, besides my resume, is to provide clarity and to get some understanding of standardized testing, college applications, and how to create a strategic plan. And as a little bit of a bonus too, we're going to have access to 2 free tutoring hours as a gift and a thank you to all of you. You'll see some information about that at the end, but of course I'll incorporate that into the email you'll receive later tonight. So, without further ado, here's tonight's agenda. As you may have heard, the ACT has recently changed, just like last year when the ACT changed. You notice they'll tend to do that a lot with each other. So, we're going to talk about the differences there and what they mean. Certainly, for some students, it's really going to be a one or the other situation. For some students, they might feel equal on both tests. So, we'll go through that and some tips for figuring out which test is best and also understanding the changes. Then we're going to dive into a topic that seems to change all the time on test optional policies. There's some myths and facts about test optional plans at particular universities, and it tends to change every couple of months. A new news story comes out about a school going back to requiring tests, another school going optional for another year, a school maybe going test blind. So they're changing frequently. So it's something that myself, as someone within the profession, needs to keep up on. But as parents, for planning for your students, it's important to know when and if they're going to need to take a test and what schools are requiring what type of test optional policy, or is it back to required. So we'll touch on that this evening as well. And then also, talking about building a strong admissions profile. This is going to be about what we know today goes into a well-rounded profile versus some of the things we've noticed in the past. We have more people than ever applying to college. So there's some things that we consider as a different and more holistic approach to showing a side of yourself that your application might not typically show in the way we've traditionally thought of it. And then we'll end too with a strategic timeline for success and just really how to spread out and tackle these mini admission related tasks over years. So we'll even talk about kids that are in 7th grade. We'll talk about 9th graders. We'll talk about juniors. We'll talk about rising seniors. So you'll get a little glimpse at everything in between so that you know what to do and when, and how, and that, there's a lot of different plans for different students. All right, so we'll dive into digital SAT versus new ACT. And this just tends to happen in little cycles like this. Just when you thought the changes were over and you just adjusted to the new SAT, the ACT up and changed. So some facts here. The SAT became digital in March of 2024. So if you have any older students, they may have taken a paper-based SAT before that, or their very first SAT may have been the digital SAT in March of this past year, and last year rather. That was the final test of its inaugural year. Obviously, this past March was one full year into testing. We've seen it go fairly well for the most part, though you may have seen on the news that there was one particular test date in which certain test centers experienced some technical issues and students had to retest on a new test date. They've done a very good job of alleviating that for the most part, but as you can imagine, there's some hiccups in the first year. Now, the ACT has launched their enhanced ACT, which started in April, and then they're having digital tests. They still have paper as well, and both colleges will accept both tests regardless. They're aware of the changes. They know some students might be in the middle of having taken an old ACT and now have a new one. It's one of those things that colleges are certainly aware of, especially, going back to 2024 when kids had a paper-based test and a score report from a digital test. And even before that, years and years ago, when the test switched to 2400 and then back to 1400. And, when SA became optional, then eliminated, and then all of those things. So colleges are certainly aware you're not going to be in a pickle in terms of that. But there are some key differences to be aware of that will help you choose the right path for your student and make sure it's the most efficient path. So just to review a little bit about the digital SAT itself, some of you in this room may have taken a digital SAT mock test with us, or your child has. It being online truly isn't the major change about the test. I myself have a rising junior as my daughter, and they're used to taking some tests online. They went through COVID, things changed. They take quizzes on Google Classroom, but really what the big difference is the adaptive format of the testing. So it's adaptive by section, not by question. And that, while it's still out of 1600, it is a big change to the scoring. And I have another slide on that we can take a peek at that will be more helpful. And then we have the sections were altered. So now reading and writing sections are combined, whereas in the past, those were two separate sections and then two separate sections of math. math has some new features as well. And the good news for everyone is that the test is shorter. So that has been a benefit for students. I think it aligns with test taking endurance, but also having students stare at a screen for an extended period of time we know is not good, and that it's going to cause some exhaustion. So I was glad when they, pulled back a little bit on the length there. So, as I mentioned, the really big part of this is the adaptive scoring. So basically what this means is a student's performance of module one of one section. So let's say reading and writing, that first module they take, that ends up dictating the difficulty of the second module. So in other words, you can test in a module too easy or module too hard. There's no medium, there's no in between. So for module two, reading and writing, you go into easy or you go into hard, and then that doesn't change. Same thing for math once you get there. And so basically what this does to the student's score capability is that when they're in easy, their score ceiling is lower. So that means it really caps them at about 600 points total that they can achieve. Whereas if you test into hard, you can hit the full 800 on that section, if you get everything correct. So that is really what the big change is here. And while students have reported not necessarily feeling it, there can be some anxiety knowing that that's what's happening. Certainly students have mentioned that when they tested into module too easy, it went by faster, they felt more confident, and then maybe they're starting to notice, okay, is this the easy section? And then when you test into module too hard, you're going to feel that you only got one easy question and then got a bulk of hard and medium. So some students remark that they don't feel it. Other students, it's very obvious to them. And certainly colleges can tell to an extent based on the score as well. So here's a good example of just kind of how to see what it looks like. So this is from our testing platform, which is very similar to the official SAT, is that this student, in this case, tested into module 2 easy for the math section. So that means in math module 1, they got roughly less than 70% correct. It could be 68%, you know what I mean? There's a little bit of a line there in the sense that some students might push into module too hard with 69% correct, but the rough estimate is you need 70% correct to test into module too hard. And so when you test into module too easy here, you can see they're only given one hard question. Then you'll get a bulk of medium, so you can see 6 medium questions here, and then there's 15 easy questions. And so in these cases, and then you'll see the same thing on reading and writing module 2, but let's say it was hard, then it would be reversed. So you're going to get 10 hard questions, some medium, and very few easy. So that's the really, a big adjustment that students have to make with this test. If it's their first test ever of this nature, it's not really an adjustment. It was bigger for those students that were taking both at the time. So I do think now that students have taken the PSAT like this for 2 years now, the third one coming up this October. So they've been exposed to it. They know what the test looks like. Our mock tests mirror it exactly in terms of adaptive scoring, the tools that are available, the types of questions asked, the weighting of the questions, the algorithm that is used to determine the scoring. So again, this is something to keep in mind as you're looking at which test is best for your student. And it's something to, take one of our mock tests, meet with somebody like myself, and go over if that's the right fit for your kid. We've seen a lot of success with it. We've had students that felt it wasn't, more difficult than the paper-based test or anything like that. The content has remained the same. And so when I said altered sections, previously reading and writing were 2 sections. Now it's just 1, but 2 modules. And then the excerpts are shorter. So what you will see now, 1 little excerpt, 1 question, 1 little excerpt, 1 question. It might jump from nonfiction to something more quantitative related. So you'll see some graphs in there. Then it will jump over to poetry or something from a play. And those types of questions, like I said, it's very different than what us as adults in this room probably experienced on the test, because we used to have, 4 or 5 paragraphs, answer 3 or 4 questions about it. Now it's 1 excerpt, 1 question, 1 excerpt, 1 question. So a little bit different pacing wise there. And then on the math side, which would have made me very happy back in the day, is students can use a calculator on both sections of the math test now. It used to be 1 with and 1 without. Now it's full usage throughout. There are certainly questions that students can solve without a calculator. There are some that will certainly make it a lot easier and be able to accelerate your time on it. And there is a calculator built into the system. It is the Desmos calculator. There's plenty of samples of it online that you can play around with. It's the same calculator built into our system. Students can still bring their own calculator. It just has to pass the College Board's list of requirements. There's very few, like you'd have to have a really, really tremendously complicated and superior calculator for it to be rejected, but you always want to check the list that's on the College Board website. And so now the test is 2 hours and 14 minutes long. It used to be almost 3 hours. Reading and writing, you'll see, is 64 minutes total. The math section is 70 minutes. So the big takeaways here, like I said, scoring is adaptive. So that's something to consider. It's supposed to provide a more precise assessment of ability. That's what the College Board is telling us. They wanted to make sure that the difficulty of the questions answered played into this and how many of the students got correct. It's still a no wrong answer penalty test. So no penalty for wrong answers, I should say. So you should still guess. You should still try to fill everything in because you're not going to lose 1/4 of a point for getting the wrong answer. So you want to give yourself as many opportunities as possible to get the correct answer. Content is mostly the same. There's a few differences that you'll see, like I said, about the length of certain questions and the phrasing of rhetorical synthesis questions, but everything that they've been preparing for before still applies. There's some more real-world context questions that they've decided to add in to the new test that's more related to college and careers. And the math content is the same, but now you can use a calculator, as I mentioned before. So if you want to screenshot the takeaways, here they are. But again, you'll get the recording afterwards. Okay. So now the new ACT. So you may have been familiar with it before, or this might be your first introduction to it. In the past, the test was paper-based only, and then they had gradually begun to introduce digital testing at select centers. This past April, the test changed officially, and the reasoning that the ACT has given was very similar to that of the College Board. They want to reflect college readiness. They want students to be using the technology that they're used to and just adapt past the Scantron test, and just overall really improving the test taking experience. When the ACT announced this change, they did note the complaints that students had before, like, what if I don't want to take the science section and I'm just want to measure my reading and writing and math, or this test is really long, and just like different questions about that, or there's the way they phrase questions on a certain section. So there were a lot of questions that came through, and the ACT decided to change. Before, it was 2 hours and 55 minutes long. English section, math section, reading section, science section, and an optional writing section. When you choose the optional, then the time goes up to 3 hours and 35 minutes. Offered on paper and digitally at select centers. And now you're going to see that that's the case across the board. It can be digital or paper-based. They're not taking paper-based away. And it's accepted at all colleges that accept the SAT. No preference between the two. Scores can be compared via a conversion chart. So that's easy enough for admissions to do. So this past April, students testing online had some more flexibility and choice. But September 2025 is, all students that are testing on a Saturday. So this is different than a school day test, but the traditional, what you would be signing your child up for, when they're testing September and forward, they will benefit from all of those enhancements and all of the choices they get. So that's online or on paper. So students are still able to take either. If you have a student that you feel would be much more adept at the paper-based version, or for example, there are many students with documented disabilities that would benefit from a paper-based test as well. You can still access that from the SAT, but as you can imagine, it's not adaptive. So there's a slight difference there. And so those things to take into consideration. Overall plan is that they're planning on giving both. Take that with a grain of salt that they'll keep that forever, because it was about 2 years ago where they said they weren't going to go online. So, but as for the foreseeable future, you can count on them having both. So good news for this, for a lot of students, is the reduction in total number of questions. There's 44 fewer. If you looked at the ACT before, the first section is about 70 questions long. It's daunting. So this has moved into a better direction and shortened the test duration overall. So students are experiencing more time per question, so they're able to think more clearly. And they've done some answer choice reduction on math questions so that they're picking between 4 instead of 5, which you saw in some questions before. Now, students can opt to not take the science section. So you can opt out of the writing, opt out of the science if you want. And it doesn't change your composite score because now they're not even going to factor the science into the composite score, just like they hadn't been with the writing score. Students will receive a STEM score if they choose to take it, and colleges will see that. If you don't take it, then it will just show your traditional composite score, no extra scores with it. So again, not taking the STEM does not affect your composite score, and that's traditionally what colleges are looking at for the most. And again, this being the important part, the new ACT is not adaptive. There is no adaptive quality to it whatsoever. Getting certain questions wrong will not push you into a different section. And that is why their paper-based test remains the same as the online test. So that could be a factor for a student. Sometimes that might play into test day anxiety, but there are great differences between the tests anyway that would factor into that as well. And so, these are the general differences that we've pretty much gone over. Both paper and digital will be available. Digital tests obviously get corrected faster, so you'll receive those more quickly. For example, with the SAT right now, you're seeing 2-week turnaround time, which is really helpful when you're considering, like, if you're taking the October test date and have a November 1st deadline, you're going to still get your test back in time. Content's going to remain mostly the same for students, but the digital format, you just need to adjust to navigating to it on a screen. You will still have scratch paper so you can write stuff down, but some students liked annotating on the paper, so that can be something to think about, but there's a highlighting feature on both of the tests that students can use. And so shorter test, so that's beneficial overall. And then it becomes the big question of which is the right test for your child. So for the SAT, in terms of reading comprehension, you're seeing those shorter single question passages. So you read one, answer a question about that. So there'll be the main idea section. You'll get 4 questions that are phrased like, what's the main idea of this text? And then 2 that are about the purpose of the text. And it will just be literally 5 different texts that you're reading. So this is ideal for students who excel in brief focused reading. This changes our opinion a little bit from the past about which test was better for students with ADHD. Right now, it sounds like the SAT could be a little bit better, and we've seen some benefits there. ACT has much longer reading sections. That's better for students who handle longer passages well. So students there will see very long passages and numbers that are associated with the questions they're being asked. So number 3 will be about the line underlined that's 3 in a long passage and answering that. SAT math remains incredibly focused on algebra and problem solving. You'll see advanced math and algebra as the 2 biggest components of the test, and a calculator is allowed throughout. ACT has always had more geometry questions throughout the test, so you will find that the math section feels a little longer in terms of content domains, but you can still use a calculator on both sections, though they argue all questions can be solved without a calculator. One really great way to find out which test is best for your student is to take a no harm, no foul mock test. So we have an SAT mock this Saturday. I'll give you guys all the link to that, and you can follow the link in the chat as well. And then the ACT mock test on August 16th. With these 2 tests, it gives an excellent opportunity for students to see which test is best for them and what they tend to feel more comfortable with. Some students will take it, and like I said, we'll use the conversion chart, and they'll be almost identical. And then there will be other students where we can tell there's a big difference and you should run with one test over the other. I hardly ever, if at all, recommend studying for both. When you do that, you're studying for 2 very different tests and you're bifurcating your attention there. We want to make sure that students feel adjusted and confident in one of them. And I do see a question popped up in the chat over here about which test do colleges prefer. There is no preference. Like I said, they have a conversion chart between it. So if you give them one of your scores, they convert it to the other one and they can tell what it is. There's very rarely a school that will mention a preference for a specific program, for example. In the past, we did see some with like the ACT science score years ago where they would say, we'd love to see the science score for this. But truly, there is no preference. And it's often regional. So I'm from Boston, for example, and I find that most students I've worked with have gravitated towards the SAT. We see kind of a split in Virginia, and then in other states where it's more of an ACT focus. So no worries there about picking the wrong one in terms of colleges. They've really come around on that over the last couple of years to make sure that kids feel like they have equal opportunities to both tests and whichever one's better for them. And then I just saw another question, is there a fee to take your mock test? Yes, there is, but it goes towards fundraising for your school. So if you're doing it through Oakton, that goes to fundraising for the school itself. And so the link I sent you all is for Oakton specifically, but I'm also going to give you a code that if you want to take both tests, you get a bundle price. So if you wanted to do the mock SAT and the mock ACT, you can do that for $50 total because they're normally $39 a piece. But you don't just get the score. With that, you also get a digital workbook with 1,400 practice questions in it that is growing. And it also has other mock tests in it and then additional information, really in-depth information related to your child's scores. And then you also get to meet with us for free to go over the scores and get a personalized plan. So there's a lot of value there. And then it ends up benefiting the students of your school because it's a fundraising event. But again, I'll send you the links for these. We have SAT boot camps as well. This actually goes to the other question we were asked. We do not offer ACT boot camps. It is frankly just less popular in the area, and we don't see as many students wanting to take it. We have done it in the past. It's just something that we don't see as many kids. Statistically between the two tests, we'll get way more students signing up for the SAT. Right. And so the official SAT test dates coming up are August 23rd, September 13th, which is new this year. They did not have a September test last year, and for the last several years, they used to have one. Now they've finally brought it back. I think this is a good spot for kids because some kids feel like August 23rd is too close to the beginning of the school year. They might still be on vacation. There's things going on. September gives them a choice once they're back into the academic swing of things. Then, of course, there's October 4th, and there's more from there. Then it goes to December, but then it skips January, and it skips February, and then goes to March, and so on from there. ACT, you just missed the September cutoff date for the ACT. So these are the official test dates, not the mock tests. But there is a late fee. They do charge you a lot to register late, so always try to register early. Then they have October 18th and December 13th, and then so on from there. Are there any other questions about the tests themselves or the mock tests and what those include? I'll see if any pop up over there, but we're going to dive into something very related on test optional policies and kind of the fact and fiction of it all as of today. Like I said, it could change a great deal. Don't see any just yet, but I'll keep my eyes on it. So we do an entire webinar on this where the entire focus is on every possible test optional situation. But for the purpose of tonight's conversation and to be conscientious of your time, I'm going to briefly go into the different types of policies and what we've seen. So there's general test optional, which is the one you hear about the most. Scores are not required, but they can be submitted if it's helpful. And yes, there is an SAT date in November. So that will be the first weekend in November. I just saw a question pop up. So there's also a date then. So November, December, you can see it. Then, like I said, they skip January, they skip February, then there's March, they skip April, then May and June, then skip July. So SAT is almost every month. ACT is almost every month. Then we have conditional test optional. This would be when it's required for specific programs. So a particular STEM program might require it. An honors program might say you have to have it. Nursing, I've seen that quite a bit when I was coaching students into nursing school, that they would not let you waive sending it in. For certain programs, when they have so few seats, they need as much data as possible to evaluate their students. I've seen some schools where they've asked just for the math SAT score for engineering students in very specific engineering programs. So that's what we would refer to as conditional test optional. Then there's test blind. That's when they don't want them at all. Don't even send them. They're not going to look at them. So there's a few of those out there. Test flexible is more so like, okay, you don't have to send your SAT score, but we require some score. So it could be an AP score. So obviously you're not going to use the APs from senior year. These would be sophomore and junior year AP scores. IB scores would be accepted. There's some other exams that they may look at as well from students coming from out of the country and different things like that. So this would be deeply explained on a college's website about what they would accept. And if it's like, okay, instead of the SAT, we need 2 AP scores, or instead of this, we need this. So you'd want to look into those policies really deliberately and carefully, looking at those schools that are a little bit more test flexible. So that would be that they're required, but they'll take a variety of tests. And then there's some schools where it's placement required. So this score may determine first year course placement. So for example, there are a few schools out there that say, you don't have to send it to me during admissions, but I'm going to ask for it from you in April to help place you over the summer in the right classes. That would bypass an AccuPlacer or a placement test, but it's few and far between. It does happen, but some schools are going to give you their own version of a placement test, or they'll base it on these scores, as I mentioned, or they'll have you take a test like the AccuPlacer. All right. So, in the age of test optional, when everything happened with the pandemic, obviously test optional became much more prevalent, but it was growing in its popularity years before that. There's always been kind of a tension between which is the better indicator of future college success, GPA or test scores. In graduate school, that's what they taught us. GPA is the better indicator, right? And then some things changed, so we were starting to see test optional before, and those were popping up more and more. And then, of course, it exploded with COVID. And then we've seen people starting to reel it back in. And the reason for this is we do see a lot of GPA inflation. A lot of students are applying to college, and every single one of them has a 4.4 or a 4.02. And they're realizing they need the test scores as well. Tufts University is a fantastic example of this, where they felt like because they went test optional, they didn't evaluate their incoming freshman class as well as they had hoped, and some students were struggling with college level work. So we're seeing some differences in this, and that, we certainly want to keep an eye on and see who's changing back and who's keep maintaining it. They will tell you on their websites, hey, we're still test optional for 2025 to 2026. You want to keep an eye on it. They'll never change it right before an admissions cycle, so a student would never be put in a position to have nothing. But you do want to make sure, because just because a school is test optional today doesn't mean that in the 2027 cycle they will be as well. So the other thing here is what we refer to as the submitter advantage. At highly selective schools, we are seeing score submitters admitted at a higher rate. And that might seem somewhat obvious to an extent, but it can be really drastic. So UVA, great example from the area, the overall admit rate was 20%. That, we know it's a very tough school to get into. But of those 20% that were accepted, 72% of them submitted test scores. And so that's when it's important to look at what the average accepted test score is there. It's a 1350. So if 72% of those 9,875 students submitted scores, and that's the average, that's also showing you what they're looking for, even though they're test optional. And so there's a little bit to look at there to understand that you're going to be competing against a pool of applicants who are submitting their scores. Georgia Tech, this is what they saw before they went back to required recently, that 79% of their admitted students submitted scores. And so they have since gone back to required. The other piece here is that having a score can open doors to opportunities. So we've got the straight up admissions example that we are seeing a submitter's advantage. There are far more schools like this. Like I said, we have that full-blown webinar on that. We've seen it with, Boston College. We've seen it with, what was one of the other ones we looked at recently? Colgate. We've seen it with, a wide variety that we can certainly go over at the other webinar. But the other piece is just eligibility for honors programs. So West Virginia, they require a 1230 on the SAT to be part of the honors college. So they may not need it for you to get into the school, and you may have just skyrocketed GPA wise, but if you want to be in the honors program, which comes with a lot of benefits, you're going to need an SAT score. And the last thing I think a rising freshman in college wants to do is take another SAT over the summer before college, or the spring before college. Oftentimes, too, this results in access to larger merit scholarships. So, for example, Hofstra University reserves the top scholarships for score submitters. Most schools do a little bit of both. If you're optional, they're still going to offer you some merit-based aid based on your GPA, other accomplishments. Of course, there's need-based aid, which is completely separate. And then there's some schools that are looking at a combination like this, where they're looking at your GPA and your test scores to determine how many scholarships you're receiving. So some schools might have something called a presidential scholarship, which is associated with a 3.5 GPA and a 1250 plus, different things like that. So you want to keep these in mind just to open doors to opportunities. If you can test well, there's no reason to not have a test score in your pocket. And there's ways to maximize your test score, to work with a tutor to make sure you're making the gains for you rather than what all of your peers are doing. It's a very individualized test once you see the results of it. Because two kids might have the exact same score and be faltering in different areas on the test. So no two kids have the same plan of attack for prepping for a test of this nature. And so, why scores still matter. As a guidance counselor, I was a big proponent of GPA as the much better indicator. And, I was getting excited when there were more test optional schools. But what I have seen in the last 5 years, it's still an ability to showcase strengths not reflected in transcripts. So, for example, if a ninth grader really struggled in math and then did very well on SAT math when they were a junior, it shows so much growth. It also can, highlight a student's potential in lieu of limited access to advanced coursework. There are some schools that don't offer as many IB or as many AP classes, or they're not an IB school, and so a student doesn't have access to that. Or they're not near a community college where they can take dual enrollment classes. Or it's such a small school that, frankly, there's just not enough classes offered for that. There's other students who have moved a lot and weren't able to meet the requirements to take certain higher level classes. It's a really great chance to show that despite some barriers and some hiccups, you were able to achieve quite a bit. And then if it can, bypass some placement tests. Nobody wants to take that anyway. All right. So that's lengthy spiel on test prep and test optional policies. We're going to dive into building a strong admissions profile now. I don't see any new questions just yet, but what I am going to do is I'm just going to pop those links back into the chat for anyone who was just joining us. Those are there, and we'll show you the mock test. When you click on that too, if this is the specific Oakton page that it's taking you to as well. All right. So what goes into this well-rounded admissions profile today that we're talking about? There's the traditional things we expect, but admissions processes have become more complicated. There's several reasons why. Frankly, increased competition. As we all know, more students are applying to college than ever before. And then admissions is just more selective every year because of this. It was the year before last that Virginia Tech received 56,000 applicants. There's 32,000 students at that school. So they can't all be part of the freshman class, and they're exceeding the size of the entire school there. So there's things to think about what's happened there. Evolving admissions criteria. Colleges are looking for more diverse experiences, requiring applicants to showcase unique abilities beyond academics. This goes back to grade inflation, which you'll see next, but also that they're looking for something a little different. They're looking for you to not just join the traditional clubs that you're thinking you're supposed to join, to really set out your own narrative and to be your own person. And then what we've seen is that average GPAs have really risen across schools. Statistically speaking, again, we have another webinar for this where we have seen gigantic growth in GPA, which can be seen as a good thing, but it's also because we've seen shifts in schools where students can retake tests multiple times, where they can turn in all of their work at the end of the semester rather than by a deadline. Things have changed in that regard, and more students are getting A's and B's than ever, which again is a good thing, but there's some rationale behind it that we need the score to kind of settle that out, because a 4.4 at one school might not be a 4.4 at another, and a 3.7 might be just as good as a 4.4 somewhere else. So there's a lot to think about that, and it makes it harder for students to stand out in the admissions process. And so, these unique experiences I'm speaking about, I think back to when I was applying, and it was important to be a three-season athlete and to join a club and to be a leader. And those things are all still very important. Not that you have to play three sports or anything like that, but they're looking for something a little more unique now. Students have different opportunities today than perhaps we did in the past. And 68% of officers in these departments are prioritizing meaningful extracurriculars. So that's coming from NACAC, the biggest college admissions association on the planet. And what they mean by that is, don't just run track because you want to be an athlete. Run it because you love it. We see some students that will join a particular sport and not really want to be there, but it's because they want it on their college application. But what if there was something more meaningful for that child? Maybe it was volunteering at a hospital, seeking an internship in something that they really care about, creating something for the community that aligns with some of the other things they're doing. And what they're also looking for too would be the impact, like, on the community. This is very big for a school like Virginia Tech, for example. Their motto is "Ut prosum," which means that I may serve. And one of their first essay questions is about that. And so, but even take it outside of that school, 60% of these admissions officers are looking for an impact in their community or field specific experiences. So maybe you couldn't land the best internship on the planet, but did you try to go get a job shadow somewhere? So you worked in an architect or an architect's office and saw what was going on in there every day. Could you reach out to different doctors' offices in the area and interview them and learn more about the work that they do and see what you might be allowed to observe? Different things that just show a little bit more. We've seen students now too, like, having their own brand. We have students that have Instagram accounts that are about a product or a service they offer that have more followers than one can imagine, or they're creating digital art, or they have some other ability to create stuff like building their own video games, having some kind of YouTube channel, all of these, being appropriate. I've even worked with students who have their own LLC related to a coaching service they provide. I've worked with other students who created a giant Instagram following for particular service events and raising money for causes abroad, and really using their unique skill set with Instagram and TikTok and other Snapchat and things like that to get a lot of reach. Having these wonderful YouTube channels, starting their own businesses, they want to see these things that align with those unique interests and future goals, rather than just picking up every potential club that's at the activities fair at the beginning of the school year. Those things are still meaningful, but you want to attach it to your personality and who you are. And we want to start early. And this is not meant to cause fear, because the next one's going to say seventh, eighth, ninth grade here, right? And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily behind or anything like that. But we're just trying to alleviate stress later on and give enough time to build that personal narrative and that personal brand. So obviously, early preparation is going to allow your student to grow consistently across academics as they adjust to high school, developing and choosing activities that mean the most of them, and becoming leaders. Then it's allowing you to make some strategic choices. We know you can't just necessarily jump into AP Physics when you're a freshman. There's certain classes you have to take to be able to enter into that class, in that you want to build your schedule in a certain way that you don't run out of time to take a class that you really need to because of a mistake you made with classes you took freshman year. Of course, from the guidance counselor side of things, this is the one most important to me: reducing that last minute pressure. One of the toughest parts of being a guidance counselor is like the insane anxiety and fear students feel the spring before and the summer before and the early fall of senior year. And just making mistakes and rushing applications, adding a school last minute. We want to avoid that. And depth over quantity, I can't stress this enough. Provide room to really love a couple activities that really mean a lot to you. Different extracurriculars that really stand out to you as a person, rather than saying I have 55 activities. Frankly, the Common App doesn't give you a lot of room to list them anyway, and when you do list them, they give you very tiny space to explain them. But you want to just go really quality over quantity here. And then it just makes you more competitive in the long run when you start planning early. You can sustain achievement over time. You build greater relationships with your teachers and your counselors and your coaches. And it can help you stand out amid what we're seeing with admissions where, everyone and their mom is applying to all of these schools. So early can look a little bit different to everyone. Seventh, eighth, ninth grade, I put all in one bucket here because this is when kids should start thinking about what their interests are and what their goals could be in association with those. A lot of my work with kids used to be a lot of interest inventories and personality profiles, career profiles, values charts, and different things about aptitudes, and just having conversations about what is it that you like to do? What do you think this career is really like? There were students that thought a particular career or major was for them, and then they looked at a breakdown of the classes they were going to be taking, and were like, that's not really what I thought this was, and that doesn't sound like what I was aiming for. And it can allow some time for more in-depth work at looking at what might be the best path forward, and also just the acceptance that it's probably going to change, but the work you do now is helping your student understand themselves better. And then, plan with the students, counselor, and teachers to make sure we're thinking about those future courses. I think back to some of the really great teachers that I had over time that were telling me in seventh and eighth grade, oh, like you should write more and you should do this. And then, I've been a writing tutor forever now, haven't written the great American novel or anything, but they were the ones who told me which classes to take so I could eventually take AP Lit, things like that. Ninth grade, very much so, is a good time as our kids are 14 and 15 years old to explore interests, those educational pathways that are associated with careers. So starting to understand that if you would like to be a dental hygienist, how long you need to be school for that. If you want to go pre-med and then go into a particular type of medicine, how long does that take? Which careers absolutely require that you get a master's degree, which ones do not, and just trying to find the right path and mix of opportunities leading up to that. That's when you're going to be joining a lot of these clubs as well and talking to teachers and maybe creating your own club. 10th grade is when we're going to want to take the PSAT for the first time. We're also hosting a PSAT this fall for any students that are interested. It's going to be on the same day as an SAT mock test with us. And try to just get a sense of where you stand and what your baseline is. You want to understand where your student stands right now and how much time you need to maximize that score. On average, we're seeing kids do 3 months of work with us, over 3 months ahead of a test date. But students start at a variety of times. We have some kids right now who are starting for the August test date, but then are planning on taking the October or November as well. So they're going to use that first test, get really acclimated, move on to the next one, of course, because we can super score today in most cases. And just start planning for test prep accordingly. Every student is different. I have rising sophomores that are absolutely in a position to take a test early because of where they landed on a test with us. There are other students who make sense as a rising junior. There are second semester juniors where it makes more sense as well. So meeting with a professional, talking to somebody like us, talking to your kid's guidance counselor, that will all be very helpful. And then continue to develop those academic goals and extracurriculars. I think it's really important for kids to get a job and learn leadership that way and responsibility as well, whether that's an internship form or job form. And, some of this also comes down to, traditional versus new extracurriculars. It doesn't mean we have to give up one for the other, but traditionally, as I mentioned before, we're seeing kids join a lot of clubs that, we all had in high school: student government, debate, yearbook. I was the editor of the school newspaper, things like that. Sports, if you're a 3-season athlete, a 2-season athlete, whatever it might be. Did you make varsity right away? Volunteer work has always been important, especially if your kid is in National Honor Society, right? That's a huge part of it as well. Those things are all still wonderful and great. You just want to dive in a little bit deeper to some quality extracurriculars that are more aligned with your student overall. And your student might be fully aligned as an athlete, but do we add something else into that that's sports medicine related? Do we add something into that that's learning more about physical therapy or about, counseling psychology as it relates to sports psychology? That's a thing that, anything like that. Can you find a class on that the student can take? Finding those ways to connect those dots between the things that they already love to do and how it could translate into something else. We see formal research as being a big thing now too. Students can do this through science fairs that are national, regional, start at their school, but also joining in on academic research projects. There are professors at colleges that will take on high school students to help them with research. And even if it's getting a survey out, you're helping with research. Internships, if you can shadow a professional, if you can have a full summer internship in a chosen field, those require a lot of thinking ahead because a lot of those have very early deadlines and a lot of kids applying. So if you can't get one of those, then what do? Look to your community, look to the different professionals that are in the area that your child could even have like a 2-day shadow with, or maybe just a bunch of different people from the commerce community within your town and the Chamber of Commerce, that there's some people they could interview and learn more about this, and then that could turn into an opportunity. Any kind of community-based projects rather, starting a nonprofit, launching some kind of social impact initiative. We've seen a lot of kids want to clean up their town and plant flowers, do something about sustainability or related to weather. There's so many opportunities within a town, and most towns would be very happy to have it. And this was the other piece I mentioned before, some entrepreneurial ventures, running a business, starting a blog, a YouTube channel. Again, of course, we want to think really professionally about this, but we do have kids out there that are building computers on their own, and we should document that in some way. It's easy enough now to share a virtual portfolio with colleges that showcase all of your skills. Years ago, that used to just be for art students and music students sending in auditions, and it used to be for architecture students. Now, every student can have an online presence that can give an admissions rep and some insight into what they're all about. Right. And then, you want to pursue academic interests outside the classroom. One thing I know for sure from all of my colleagues that work in admissions is they want to see the things you do that you don't have to do. Like you have to go to school and take math. Everybody's told you kind of have to do at least one club or something like that. But is there anything else that would allow you to deepen knowledge? For example, one of the essays on the Common App is, what is a topic that you just can get so lost in that you lose all track of time? And who would you go to learn more about that? So if you have a kid, I've worked with a lot of students who absolutely love history, right? And they may have found a class over the summer that can deepen their knowledge that's just about a specific battle, or it's about a particular war or a particular skirmish, and they really want to learn that, or it's something related to different royal families throughout the time, in Europe, and different connections between different countries. Look for things like that. Kids might even end up writing an essay about that in the end, about how it led down this path of studying at the American Antiquarian Society and like different things of that nature, because there's a lot that our kids love that doesn't have to feel like a painful summer experience. It doesn't have to be a class they're not interested in. There's a lot of summer programs where kids can learn more about coding, or they can join something more engineering related. And there's so many of them out there that it's worth looking into early. Dual enrollment classes are always such a great idea if your student has the availability in their schedule and the bandwidth. You can get college credit for it, and you got to work with your registrar's office about how that all works, but it does demonstrate readiness for higher education. It's very easy to show that to an admissions office and show that you were able to go along with a full-fledged college class and English comp or whatever it might be, and pass the exams that are taken at the college level, write the papers, get the grade. And then any independent research projects, anything that's going to further your academic profile. Students can engage in all the research they want on their own. They don't have to have a person that's necessarily overseeing it, and they can build their own website about that or build a project related to it. And lean on the research librarians in your local community, and also the ones at the colleges that are nearby. They study all their time in school to be able to provide this kind of support. And I remember even in college that the research librarian would light up when somebody wanted help. They're all there with all this knowledge, and they may know about an internship. They may know about a particular professor who's looking for some research help. They may know about a club that's existing that you can join there that you had no idea. So lean on your community as well for all of this. Okay, that was a mouthful. I know that's a ton of information. I told you we're going to squeeze a lot into tonight. No other questions right now, so I'll dive into the strategic timeline for success, and I will also be sending you all home with a timeline you can use that you can download as your own PDF so that you have that to look at over the years with your kids. In terms of preparing for standardized tests, sophomore year is really a deal for high achieving students that are aiming for the National Merit Scholarship. You can only be eligible for that junior year when you take it, or wanting an early start to reduce junior year pressure. So I may meet with a student who's going to be a sophomore or during sophomore year this year, and they score very high on our mock test. And I may say, maybe you want to take the March test, see how you do, then take the August, and then if you need one more next fall, then you're done. And then you can focus the rest of junior year on your GPA and on your activities and on internships and things like that. Then there are other students, based on the classes that they're taking and the progression they're following in their school, it doesn't quite yet make sense to dive into the full-blown SAT yet. See how the PSAT goes and see where you're going to land math-wise, or start tutoring to get the math that you need for that. That ends up killing two birds with one stone too, because then you're better prepared for your math classes. Certainly spring and summer before junior year are ideal times. That's like the bulk of the students doing test prep with us this summer are, this summer and this past spring are rising juniors so that they can be all set, with their testing and be in a good position. And then we also see it's the most common starting point is a fall of junior year test. A perfect world, maybe take the October, the March, and see if you need the May or the June. But every kid is different, so it's worth chatting with us about it. And it just allows time for focused prep, and it allows you to recoup after a test and then prepare for the next one, and see what went well, what didn't, and what you can share with a coach about, okay, I improved here, but I just plateaued here. What do I need to do? You also want to think about academic workload. For some students, the May SAT is really hard if they have 5 APs and they're taking 5 AP exams that month. They may want to opt more for the June. Other students may say that's when finals are. I'd rather take the March. March can be a really good sweet spot for kids. But for some students that are doing the play at school, it doesn't feel as good. So you want to think about when coursework is most intense and their other responsibilities, and major events throughout the school year. I do see a question here about tips for students wanting to play a sport in college. Tip number one is to make an appointment to meet with the head of your athletic department. They are the number one resource on that. They will be so helpful. There should also be a school counselor who's more associated with the NCAA process, but I would start in the athletic department. We also will be giving an NCAA related webinar as well. We do have coaches who work with us specifically on that, and it's related to the videos that kids need to be posting online if they're looking to get recruited, the differences between the recruiting processes between all levels of athletics at the college level, and then also the academic requirements and the timeline. So for students pursuing that, I would recommend working with a college coach early and often, and then in collaboration with the head of the athletics department, or if there's an assistant there as well. Your student's coach for a particular sport has been through it before in all likeliness. But again, a lot of our NCAA students start working with us on the earlier side to make sure they're staying on track with everything and don't miss an opportunity. All right. I know that was a quick answer to your question, but certainly feel free to email me as well. So thinking about your college application timeline, this is more so in general, like when should you start building that admissions profile? That's freshman and sophomore year. This is what I mentioned before. You want to explore those interests. You want to demonstrate leadership. Junior year, you want to deepen your involvement in those key activities, right? This is sometimes when a kid becomes a captain on a team, or they become vice president of a club, or they're doing an internship with a teacher that they've had a relationship with and they want to help with a program they're creating. Spring of junior year is when you're going to want to build that balanced college list. As I mentioned, my daughter is a rising junior and we've been talking about it, but I know that list is going to change between now and then. So it's great to start talking about it now, starting to do the research, and leave a lot of room for change and for additions and different things that might occur over time, because they could go on a college visit and completely change their preferences. And then you want to have a really balanced college list between reach, match, and safety options. And then summer before senior year, you want that list to be finished, of course. You want to be planning all your application strategies. A lot of students do their college essay with us over the course of the entire summer before senior year, because it really can be very difficult to have that as homework on top of your real homework from classes. If I could make every kid promise, I would have them finish every essay before August 15th every year, so it's not hanging over their heads. And so, working with a college coach on that is extremely helpful. But at least this gives you a list, an idea of when to be working on certain things, just so you can compartmentalize it. It's a lot. So just take little chunks of it at a time, and you'll see with the checklist I'm going to give you all too, it will help you break it down from there. And so that should be helpful as well. College essays, I just mentioned, you want to start brainstorming ideas in the spring of junior year, then really working on them during the summer. If you are planning on applying early action, early decision, those are things you need to keep in mind, because you're going to need materials earlier. You're going to need to make sure your letters of recommendation are earlier. That's why every kid should ask for their letters of recommendation by the end of junior year. A lot of your teachers will require that you do that anyway. But you want to make sure that you're submitting early. And so a lot of times that's November 1st, November 15th, sometimes December 1st. And then regular decision for all those January and forward deadlines at that point, planning for that accordingly, because every school has different policies about when you need to request your transcripts. The schools I've always worked at, it's a month before you're applying at least. Then you've got to send your SAT or ACT scores. You've got to do that online. And even though they're literally just sending it electronically, you want to do it not the day of your application. Different things that the school needs to receive from you, financial aid stuff. You want to make sure you're on top of all of that. The worst emails kids receive, even though it always ends up being fine, is the email from admissions being like, we're missing your transcript, we're missing your letter of rec, your file's incomplete. Typically ends up being fine, and it's just that they've received it and it didn't make it to the file yet, but it can be nerve-wracking. So the earlier, the better, for sure there. This is the checklist that I'm going to be sending to all of you. I know it's tiny here, but it's a regular size PDF when you receive it that breaks down 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, and you can't quite see this, but some summer checkpoints at the end that you would want to address every year. So that's something that, hopefully you can use. Feel free to share it with some friends. And it can be just put it on the fridge and check off things periodically to make sure you're staying on track. And even if you're a parent of a sophomore, don't be afraid to backtrack to the 9th grade stuff there and see what things you can be working on together. Look ahead to 11th grade and see what that's going to look like. And hopefully it'll be a really useful tool to you moving forward. So I will send that to you. We did get one more question here about whether or not the slides will be shared. They will be shared in some of them in a PDF format, but you will get them in the recording as well. And so here, don't forget, if you book a consultation with us within 24 hours, you'll get 2 hours free and 50% off registration. So that doesn't mean you have to meet with us within 24 hours, but just book a consultation between now and this time tomorrow night. It can be for next Thursday. It can be for, the week after that. It doesn't have to be that you have to somehow find me tomorrow in time, but just make sure you're booking that, and then you can get this. It helps you save a lot. It's over $200 in savings, and it's a great way to get started with us, whether it's for academics, test prep, college coaching, the full gamut. We have students with us that study for the SSAT for high school admissions. We have other students who work on executive functioning with us, or, a wide variety of students who come to us just for writing skills or reading skills. So all of those things are available. And I will be sharing all the links for this, so no worries there. There's my email address as well. Any other questions? I'll keep my eye on the Q&A there and see if any pop up. Get in, sorry, 4 minutes late. I try to get in under the wire on that, but any other questions from the group? Don't see any popping up. Looks like we had mostly some about, college sports, SAT dates, mock tests. Our mock tests are fantastic. I know it sounds like I have to say that, But as a school counselor, I wish my students had had something like this in the past because it really shows you question by question exactly what they did. You do not get that kind of insight from a practice test from the College Board. This shows you actual question type by question type, not content domain, but the actual types of questions within content domain. So I do highly recommend it. The results are incredibly informative. And we love going over them with families and showing them the most efficient way to do it so kids aren't spinning their wheels. Every kid is different and needs a different approach. And so, all right. Is it recommended students and parents attend the consultation together? Yes, we do recommend that. If for some reason the student cannot attend, we understand kids are really busy. They might have captain's practice, they might have work, but a parent does have to be in attendance. A student cannot attend alone because they're under 18. So we love to have both there so we can ask the students some questions too and see how they felt about the test. But if they can't make it, happy to meet with the parents, send a summary afterwards. And then, if the student ends up having questions, you can certainly send them our way. All right. Well, that looks like the last question tonight. Again, if you think of something in a couple hours, no worries at all. I really appreciate all of your time tonight and letting me ramble about the 400 parts of college admission within an hour to try to get you guys as much information as possible. We love working with Oakton families. We love working with your PTSA, and we look forward to offering you more resources like this throughout the year. And as we have mock tests with your schools in particular, our favorite part of the year is cutting the check at the end to put it towards all of your PTSA's endeavors and working with the lovely people on your PTSA. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I hope you all have a great night. Take care.